It's all good. It's all good. Yeah. All right. Wow, look at all those fantastic artworks. Beautiful. Amazing. So do we have like a first, second, third, fourth kind of thing?
Nope.
Nope.
They're all just independent.
All independent. There we are, just like this. Beautiful. Wonderful. All right. All right. So what was your experience like creating over these 4 weeks?
I don't know, I like creating. I'd much rather put it to picture than to word.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it, I don't know, just feels easier. Sometimes I find words limiting.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, very good.
I think like when I think about transference and countertransference, it's kind of all about interpretation.
So
So
true.
what one person takes from it, not everybody's going to take from it. It's kind of like art.
Very much so, right? We have a chance to connect with your subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what would you say that your experience of the process was? Did you find it helpful? Did you find it insightful?
I think like each piece was kind of done after like a session where I felt like, or so, like something happened where I felt like I was, something was brought up. So it was helpful to kind of process it that way. I think was kind of like that one there was with a client who came back and didn't realize like this one here is all pink, right? Their leaves are pink and their leaves are blue. And it always felt like there was just like all this stuff kind of fluttering around, but then she came in and she brought something in, and then so these are purple down here, you can kind of not tell, but it's almost like a blend of the two, and she kind of came in with this new interpretation of, because I felt like we were always kind of butting heads, like not butting heads, but like I would say something and then I felt like she would misinterpret what I said and I would misinterpret what she said. And so it was more like what was going on, I think, underneath. And so this was kind of like right here where the roots kind of came together, and then it kind of created something new. So.
I see. That's very interesting how it is that you've done that, so that the two of you are actually equal, right? And blowing out different.
Yeah. Totally different.
And how did you feel in that?
Like in the session with her?
Yeah.
Frustrated. And that was feeding like, so like I would say something and then she would get defensive, right? Like my interpretation of something. Like if I made a statement of what I felt like she was saying to me, like what I was getting from her,
Right.
and then she would get frustrated because she's like, no, that's not at all what I was saying, you know? And so, and then I think my frustration, and then it would kind of close me off too, right? Because I was like, oh, I'm getting this wrong. So then I almost felt like I was less attuned.
I see.
Because I had this block, like, because I was overthinking, right? I was like, well, I'm getting it wrong, you know? So then it was just like that kind of process. And then being able to kind of go into it and just, I have like in my planner, I had this little sticky note and I wrote in it, I was like, openness. So every time I opened up my planner that week, I would see this sticky that was just like openness. And so I would just remind myself to just be open to the experience, and like no matter what they were giving me, right, to just be open to whatever it was, to hold it.
That's amazing.
But she came back, and then when she came back, she was like, oh, I told my friend what you said and I was so frustrated. And then she was like, yeah, no, that's exactly you. And so then she said when she came, like after having that experience with her friend, then she started looking at maybe why I was saying the things saying. And
Right.
and so, and her friend was having the same experience, and then she talked to her mom, and her mom was like, yeah, no, that's you, and so she came back with this new understanding of what she thinks she's projecting is not what she's projecting.
Right.
And so now that's what we're working on, right? About like a little more EFT.
Oh, okay. So that's funny, right? Because all of these different colors, right down at the bottom, is just the few purple ones. Just a little bit
It's
of
just a little bit growing.
a tiny bed.
Tiny seed.
Which is so interesting too, talking about growth, right? Because you've got two dead, or maybe not dead, but fall,
Yeah.
or spring. It's spring right now.
Yeah.
Spring trees.
Mm-hmm.
Your branches going back, almost like being pushed back by whatever it is that she's blowing out, and her being very solid. She looks very solid, except with a hole.
Yeah.
What is the hole?
What is the hole?
It's like a knot, a tree knot.
I put that there for like that little bit of openness.
Oh,
Where
interesting.
things can kind of get trapped in there and then kind of be pushed, and it's this tiny little area that sometimes, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. There's a thought that when someone draws a knot, right, a hole in the tree, that it's to do with some sort of sexual issues.
Oh, well, maybe.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very good. It almost looks very much like the two trees are dancing.
Yeah, it depends on what day I look at it. Yeah.
Growing into one another. That's very good. Yeah. And so then we have our second one here. This one is
Just,
a collage.
yes. So, this happened after the one. So, yeah, like here it's just like a power struggle, right? Like not knowing where, like he's trying to take control, and then at the beginning, like I was trying to take control, but I was also really, really anxious. And so him, like an explosion, and me, it was more discomfort than anything, but hits his comfort level, right? Being loud and abrasive is just kind of very much his comfort zone.
Right.
And so, and yeah, so just like the emotional baggage that people bring with you. And then I feel like my job sometimes is kind of helping to lead it in a certain way, right? Like leading them to discoveries, like the confirmation bias. That was me, overwhelmed. And so learning to kind of breathe and to just focus on like, so the next time when I met with him, I focused solely on my breathing and like really to calm myself down so I wasn't anxious, to see how if he would then, because I think he was feeding off of my anxiety because I was anxious, and so I think in his effort to calm me down, because for him loud and abrasive is like his comfort zone, right? So it's almost like he was getting louder, but that was making me more anxious. Do you know what I mean? And so he was trying to explain himself and justify himself, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then when we met the next time, like I just focused, like really focused beforehand. I did actually a meditation before I met with him, and then I anytime I noticed there was any tightness, where I was feeling like tension, I just kind of focused on my breath to just kind of feel calm. I left my arms at my side, like really focused on just being open.
Yes.
And so I found that like his entire demeanor changed. He was much quieter. He was much calmer. And there were a couple times where I was able to even kind of say to him, like, no, hold on a second. You didn't listen to me. And so he was kind of taken aback by that, and he was like, what? Like, you just said that to me? And I was like, yeah, no, hold on a second. You didn't listen to what I just said. And so I restated what I said, and then went further because he cut me off, right?
Uh,
And so he was able to kind of go back and go, at the end, he goes, yeah, I guess I do have a problem with that, not listening to people. So I had to do that like 2 or 3 times, but like being able to do that, I think it was helpful for him because he realized that I was comfortable with him.
I see.
Right? So he didn't.
Yes.
So I think he's used to people kind of being intimidated by him, which I think sometimes he works in his favor. Like I think he uses it in his favor, but at other times I don't think that he understands how he comes across either.
Right.
And so then he gets defensive because he's like, no, I am really a good guy. You know, like I'm a stand-up guy, but then he kind of comes across as being really angry. So I was able to say that to him in one of the sessions. I said, yeah, I actually think you are a nice guy. I said, but you don't come across that way. You come across as very angry.
Very good.
So this represented balance mostly, like fine. It's almost like dancing. I think sometimes like, you know, it's that back and forth and balancing. And this here was where like 2 trees kind of come together, right? And they kind of grow together, and then they kind of create this balance in the middle somewhere.
I see. Well, it's getting comfortable with that confrontation.
It's hard.
Definitely, very much so, right? It's like here you are, sort of like waiting, your mouth open. Is it going to land? What's coming back at me?
Yeah, I don't know.
And interesting in regards to the trees too. Again, it's
I like trees. A lot of my artwork at home is trees.
Oh, is
My
it?
husband always says that. He's like, "You love trees." I'm like, "I do. I love trees."
Well, you know, some thought that they're, you know, to do with the female body, right?
Maybe I never thought about it.
And it looks very chaotic. It's almost like a nest, right? Like a ball of twine, even.
Sometimes it feels that way. Like when you're in a session, right? It feels like it's overwhelming, and it's not until you can kind of step back from it and reflect on it sometimes that you can even see where maybe where something went amiss or where something was misunderstood, or even when things went well too, right? To look back at it and go, yeah, you know what, we were kind of enmeshed in a way. But sometimes that can be, I think, a good thing, because it can not enmeshed necessarily, but like where if you have clients, like I have a client that's really not, I don't know how to say it, but like emotionally avoidant, right? And so sometimes like me having those, like with him, I'll purposely have kind of an emotion to something he says because I want to mirror that, you know, that feeling and what it looks like. And so sometimes he'll get upset and I'll be like, you know, well, what's going on for you right now? And he's like, I don't know, I'm just feeling really upset. And then I say, well, when you told me that, you know, I was feeling really upset by that, you know. And so so I understand why that would be, you know, upsetting. Are you okay feeling, you know, the sadness or whatever it is? So so sometimes like just bringing it into the room can be helpful.
It can, definitely, right? Mirroring and normalizing, right? It's interesting that you've written the word baggage here, because the clients come with their baggage. We have our own.
Yeah.
And did you notice that at all in regards to like these first 2, in regards to getting in touch with your own stuff?
Oh, I got my stuff. I'm comfortable with my stuff. My stuff is okay. In counseling, I feel like a lot of stuff has been brought up for me. The stuff that I thought would be really upsetting for me isn't upsetting as much as I thought it would be. And then other things like I said, had a guy he's a heavy smoker, and I never really thought about it, but the smell of that, you know, that permeated smoke,
yes,
you know, where it's like so deeply, found it really triggering. So I really had to like figure out where that was coming from, you know, because I knew as soon as I smelled it, like it was just like this immediate panic for me, right?
Oh.
And so I had to, you know, figure out where that was coming from and kind of work through that and come up with some strategies, knowing that, I mean, the smell's not going to go away. So I have another client too who's a heavy smoker. So
Right?
Yeah, there's certainly been some stuff that's been kind of brought up, but deal with it as it kind of comes.
This is an interesting statement, especially in red here. I could be your hero.
Mm-hmm.
Say a bit more about that one.
The I could be your hero wasn't actually like I could be their hero or they could be my hero, but that they themselves could be their own hero was actually more the thought on that. And it was, the idea was that, you know, if I can be there and hold space for them, that they could figure out how to be their own hero.
Ah, I see.
That was more, yeah.
Interesting also, too, that your first two artworks are very, very, well, black, right? There's a lot of black here. There's a lot of black here. Mm-hmm. What do you associate black with?
I like the contrast. I like that there's
the black and white.
Yeah, I like the extreme kind of contrast, and then when you do add those little bits of color, then they really pop. So it's just, if you have like tons of color, I find it just I don't know, sometimes it just kind of blends.
Oh, that's true. So it's about the color. Then I'm sort of guessing. Then the people are actually in the background.
Yeah.
So it's about the motion that's happening in the room, in the art. Interesting.
I think this one ended up being mostly black and white just because that's what was there.
Right.
But that one there in particular was, just kind of like that, the stillness of the people and or the trees, right? They're so still and they're so sturdy, and sometimes we're just so set in our ways, and so it's not necessarily like the being themselves that changes, or the stature, or the tree, right? It's the interaction between those emotions and those thoughts and those words and all of that kind of stuff that then creates change.
I was just noticing when I was just speaking about change, when I was looking at the hands here in this one, because in regards to like a tug of war, right, the hands would be underneath to pull, and with these ones, they're over top. Did you notice that at all?
Nope.
I just thought that was very interesting. It's more like a lighter grip, right? It would be harder to.
Well, it was two things, right? And it was also like the power struggle, but I was also looking at that as like a ledge. And it's almost like a ledge to pull your, like I thought of them pulling themselves up.
I see, pulling up. I see. That's just interesting. Different interpretations, right? That's very interesting.
Art is cool.
That brings us to the third one. The third one is a painting. Is this acrylic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
A lot of color in this
I know,
one.
yeah.
Very different.
Yeah, so this kind of represented the different parts of self that are
okay.
all brought into the room. And if you look like this one, right, she's fully covered and she's really meek, right? And then this one is kind of shorter, but I almost think of like her as like being really strong. This one's like almost serving, people pleaser, kind of a servant, kind of, just keeping everybody happy. And this one here is, I see this part as kind of like trying to hold these two back.
Okay. What would you name this half hidden one there?
This one here.
Kind of in between.
She's the one that's holding them back.
And what is this one holding here?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking when I drew that. Seems whimsical, though.
Yes, it seems like something is moving there, or even that there might be even another image, kind of like a ghost of an outline of another image.
Yeah, and I think about this like as this person, right? The person that's kind of, I don't know, if you are familiar with the structural dissociation, right? That apparently normal person, but I like to call it the going on with everyday life person. But like this person, right? Very logical, very kind of, and is always trying to hold these people back from getting in to the session. And I think about that, right? Like how many people, like how many parts of self people are trying to control when they walk into a session.
I see.
Not letting people see the real authentic self, right? All the parts of self. They show us what they want us to see.
So true. Yeah. That's interesting. So this is indicative of you.
Or any client, yeah.
Or any client as well. So you're walking in with...
Either me, yeah, so it could be me walking in, right, and trying to put on the counselor self, right, to keep these parts in check. Or it could be the client coming in and, again, trying to keep those parts in check, right?
Yes.
And so never really seeing that kind of full authentic self. And I think our job sometimes is to just kind of create space where they feel comfortable enough to show all those parts of self.
Yeah, that's interesting how it is that you've got the color differential, right? When I think of greens, blues, more subdued, more relaxed, and then you've got the reds, the oranges, right?
Think about this as like, the emotion. Like these are just like the real emotional parts, right? And they're always kind of at odds with each other.
Yes. And it's interesting that you are kind of like looking the other way, as opposed to looking at walking in the room. You're looking at, well, in essence, yourself, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, how can you really truly interact with anybody if you're not aware of your parts of self and letting them express themselves? So your back really is turned, even though it might like not actually be turned. Like literally, but like figuratively it is turned because you're not being very open.
And it's interesting also too that there's no faces. They're just blank. They could have any face.
They could have any face, yeah.
So the room, the therapy room, I'm guessing this is the door, is very small, off to the distance. So you're going to have to be some squeezing to go in there.
It's a long walk.
long walk. Yes, yes. And it's also like the way in which you've drawn it up, almost like kind of a sort of religious connotation, almost theological connotation.
Yeah, it could be.
And it's interesting the black spots down here. Any thoughts as to?
They're shadows. Just kind of those, I don't know, foreboding things that you're trying to avoid going into counseling.
In a strange way too, it also almost looks like a person.
Yeah.
The room itself.
Yeah.
And then there's this black up here, which I find very intriguing.
Yeah. It's the dark cloud.
Yeah. The dark cloud. Do you think that it could be indicative of trepidation or
I think it's
anxiety?
worry, worry, anxiety that kind of comes with you in the room, comes with like any client coming in, it comes with any counselor going in. I don't know, maybe just because I'm a student, but like every time I meet with a client, like there's always some kind of like, even though like I plan and I'm like, okay, like I'll have a vague idea of like what I want to do, but it depends on what they bring into the room, right? But it's just like that idea of, am I going to be good enough today? Am I gonna, make a difference today? Am I gonna help them today? Am I, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Am I gonna be the right fit for today? Am I gonna be whatever? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and just trying not to. It's hard because it's finding that balance of figuring out what to let into the room and what not to let into the room as a counselor. Because sometimes, like if I'm tired as an example, right? So it's figuring out like, okay, well, sometimes it's like, that's okay, you know what I mean? Because you have another mom or whatever, right? And you're like, oh, I'm tired today. And that opens up a conversation of, you know what I mean? Oh my gosh, you know what? Whatever. And so it's that kind of, that feeling of mutually getting each other, right? Being on that same level and opening up that dialogue and creating an openness, right? Of understanding, right? And then somebody else, like, who's coming, I mean, I certainly would never be like, oh, I'm tired today, because I think he just wouldn't know how to take it, right? He just wouldn't understand how to navigate that, right? Like what he should do or do you know what I mean? And so it would create anxiety for him. So it's just kind of knowing.
Well, it's that balance again, like you have in your second artwork there, right? What is it that you can bring with whom, right? In order to maintain that balance, because everyone is different.
Yeah.
It's very good. All right, and then we have the fourth artwork here, which is much larger.
Yes, and it's just kind of
another painting.
Yeah, figuring out who to be sometimes, figuring out which face to put on, figuring out how to what's going to be the best option.
Interesting. And the way in which you have her, you bandaged, much like wounded healer.
Yeah, it's this, I don't know, like I think about it as like a brokenness, right? Or fragmentation, and then just kind of trying to figure out, I think we all have different parts of self, and so we all kind of we bring them everywhere with us. It's just, we all kind of have different selves that we put forth in different times, right? Depending on what we need or what we're trying to get or whatever. And so I like to bring that aspect into my work with clients as well, like helping them to recognize all different parts of themselves. But just for me too, to recognize my own brokenness, and that, sometimes when I walk in the room, I'm putting on a mask too, right? Just, and so I think sometimes just recognizing that sometimes I'm even putting on a mask helps me to realize, maybe when a client's not being as receptive to me as maybe they normally are or whatever. It's recognizing that, hold on a second, like, am I being authentic?
I see.
It's hard to be authentic all the time.
Is it authenticity, or are you creating yourself? Constructing yourself, right? There's like the authentic you, right? I'm the same on the inside as I am on the outside.
Yeah.
And then there's the construction. Depending upon what it is that's being brought, you construct yourself.
Yeah, basically. Like like sometimes if I walk in, like as an example, if I'm really tired, right? I feel like I'm just probably less likely to be aware or be as kind of able to kind of move with it as easily as that if I was, say not tired or whatever, or if I, my mind's kind of thinking about, whatever went on at home today, or or whatever, what my daughter's doing or whatever, right? And so it's just kind of trying to figure out to not put on the masks, right? Because that's what we're trying to help clients do, is to like not you have to be different selves depending on where you are, because you can't be like, crazy, kooky, annoying girl at work, right? Like, obviously you can't do that, right? But it's helping them to understand that having those different parts of self is okay, knowing when to use them. But, figuring out how to help them to figure out who they are. And I think sometimes, like, if we're not being authentic, or we're not, open to the fact that, I just think it's being open. It's being aware that we have all these different parts of self, right? And just, so if I have a client that comes in and says to me, like, you're really different today, just being aware of that and saying, okay, well, yeah, you know what, I am a little bit different today. Can you tell me a bit more about what you're noticing? What are they attuned to? What are they noticing about me? And not being defensive of, no, I'm the same person. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, how dare you say that? My hair is the same color. No, so it's just, I don't know.
Have you had that happen? Have you had somebody actually notice you? Or the difference in you? Oh, and what was that like?
For me, it's hard, like, because I was diagnosed with DID. So that's, sometimes it's like, okay, like, what's going on for me? So I think there's a little bit more to it for me personally, in terms of, there's kind of that feeling of like, well, am I being, who am I right now? And is there something else going on, like, internally or whatever? Because sometimes I've got other, like, things reacting to things in my head, right? So it's trying to figure out, navigate that. But when it happened, and I just said, what kind of things are you noticing? And I think she said to me, your eyes look different to me. They're just kind of twinklier, and you are more energetic. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I said, does that upset you? Does it make you, do you know what I mean? Like, how does it? And she said, no, I quite like it. It's just different. And I says, and that was it. And then we just kind of went on with the conversation. And so I kind of tried to make it more about, like, what was going on in her life, or what she was noticing. And so we could bring that into the room, right? Because obviously she was sensitive to it. And so I just tried to acknowledge it the best way that I could.
And could you identify it with how it is that you were feeling, or what was going on with you, or anything?
Yeah, so there was, in my life, I can't remember what was going on that particular day, but something really good had happened. And I remember, like, there was a part of me that was really, really excited. So it certainly made sense. And the sun was shining. It was like one of those first days where the sun was shining and it was really nice out. And so, you kind of get that. Like, it's, for me, I'm very much like with the weather, like, I notice, like, my mood changes, like, not drastically, but just kind of like, I certainly noticed that I got a little bit more of a skip in my step when the sun's shining,
I see. Yeah.
So.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So for me personally, like, there's always transference, like, and like stuff going on internally, right? So there's, and so I don't know, sometimes my husband says, like, you're always analyzing yourself, like, why are you reacting a certain way? So I think because of, like, counseling and, like, for years, I've had this, like, very high awareness, right? And learning to really kind of bring in those parts of self. And so for years there was such a disconnect, and now there's, like, much more of a connection. But sometimes it can, I'm sure, people probably notice that there's differences in me, right? And that's okay. Sometimes it works in my favor, sometimes it doesn't, but that's just it's just who I am. I don't know.
I see.
Like, schoolwork, it works in my favor because this part of me is really good at schoolwork.
Oh, that's good. You need that part.
I do need that part. Yeah.
And this one seems to be very, I want to say almost bleak. Bleak in tone, except of course for what it is that you're wearing. It's just that the background seems to be so big, and then with that definitive line, right, 3/4 of the way up. It's
kind of this idea that there's nothing else in the room except for you. Right? It's like, sometimes, I don't know, like, like when I was like a client in counseling or doing counseling, sometimes it feels like you're just, like, so I don't know what the word is, but, like, vulnerable, I guess.
Oh, okay.
It's like there's nothing else there, right? There's no escape. It's like,
right.
And so
vulnerable, no shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Would the no shoes be that of like grounding?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's why I picked like a really sturdy chair and a sturdy, like it's just that, like feeling that foundation, you know, beneath you, that chair that's supporting you and the floor that's supporting you, right? Because you need those things in order to be vulnerable, like to be vulnerable emotionally. If you're not feeling like physically safe, right? How do you even open yourself up to be vulnerable?
I see. Yes. Oh, so is that maybe the representative in regards to the color black? Is that unsafe?
Maybe.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Sometimes I think like, I don't know, my experience in counseling, like I've had a really good psychiatrist, like I said, but I have had some counselors that I were amazing, and some that I just didn't, you know, I didn't feel like that. No matter how much I worked with them, like I felt safe enough that I could really share with them what I needed to open up. And some were good for certain things, and then we moved beyond that, right? And so I moved on. So I had 3 different ones, and now my psychiatrist does it. But it's just that counseling is scary. Like I always say that to my clients when they're first coming and they're nervous, and I always say like, it can be a really scary thing, you know, it's a big risk, right? To make changes in your life because things are working, however poorly, but they're still functional, right? And so, but we're really working with them and asking them to trust us, right? And to trust themselves in making these life-altering changes. And it could feel like the rug's being ripped out from underneath you sometimes, right? Just by being vulnerable and opening up that emotion, let's say, that they didn't want to, you know, even touch before, or
Oh, definitely.
so I think that for me is what this represents, is just being, you know, figuring out. To me, she's just so like open and bare and vulnerable, right? But that she's trying to figure out who she needs to be. Maybe she doesn't need to be anybody. Maybe she can just come in and not have to wear a mask.
Well, based upon what it is that she's wearing, it almost seems like she's on a stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
All dressed up, putting on a show.
Yep.
Not exactly what it is I've seen you wear.
All the time. What are you talking about? Always wearing ball gowns. What are you looking at? Actually, in the summer, I always wear dresses. It's funny. I hate the winter. I hate pants.
Oh,
I love dresses.
Really?
I don't like nylons.
Oh,
so there's
interesting.
that.
There's the combination.
Yeah.
Got it. Ah, I see. Very interesting. Yeah. So when you reflect on the 4, the 4 artworks, do you see a story? Like what do you find when you reflect on the 4? Is there a...
When I reflect on the experience of doing them, and I think what comes up really is openness and vulnerability. Those are the 2 things that just kind of, was just kind of like being open to change, being open to hearing another person's story and taking it in, and sometimes it's hard because you don't want to take it in because it's painful for them, and then if you take it in, it's painful for you, right?
Right.
And so it's figuring out how to navigate that in a healthy way. And then, vulnerability is just, again, that openness and the willingness to change. Because, I don't know. I like what I do.
Oh, that's good.
Like, I like being with the clients. I like seeing them take what I offer, or watching them grow or change as they come in, even though they might not think they're making changes, but just even say to them, oh, I noticed you're doing this lately, and they're like, oh yeah, I am, you know, and for them to just go, oh, I didn't even notice that, right, that I am kind of doing that. Or
And as you reflect on the artworks, do you see that within yourself?
growth? Absolutely. Yeah, even my husband said, There's a big difference in, I think, an openness just to kind of other people and their stories, and being able to put myself in, not necessarily in their shoes, but just being able to kind of hold space for them and not take it personally, right? To be able to just kind of like let it go and understand that, you know what, I can only do what I can do, right? So
yeah. It is a learning, isn't it?
it's a big learning.
Just to be okay.
And like, even, you know, I was thinking about, I've got one client who's been suicidal but has never acted on anything, and somebody was asking me about that, you know, how do you deal with suicidal clients? And I said, you know, it's interesting, because if they're actively suicidal, that's one thing, but I love the question, if suicide's the answer, what's the problem? Right? If suicide is your answer, then what's the problem? And the other thing is, like, never making another person accountable for somebody else's safety.
Right.
Right? So, like, if there's a couple or whatever, I know, what's her name? Corey was talking about a couple, and she'd said, oh, I asked him to make sure she was safe. And I said, be careful with that, because, you know, if she's not safe on her own, you need to be really careful about putting that on somebody else, because it feeds the need, right? So the suicide, so suicide is the answer, and it's filling a need, right, to be taken care of, and now that's just been fed.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and so it just creates that kind of, and so I find, like, I've really learned a lot in that regard of just figuring out, just asking that question, if this behavior is the answer, then what's the problem? And then trying to come up with, you know, to figure out what's underneath it. And so that's been really kind of a fascinating thing, even for me, to ask myself, like, certain things that I do, and I'm like, okay, if that's the solution, Brianne, what's the problem? You know? And I found it helpful, like, just looking at things that way. And so now, like, some clients come in, they say it right, like, before I even say, okay, I know. If this is the solution, what's the problem? So I don't know. Anyways, but it's been a real learning opportunity for me, anyways. But
well, that's good. So, speaking such, I mean, when you look at your artworks, do you notice any constraints at all?
I have tons of constraints. I don't know if they're in my artwork, but I would say, yeah, I think knowing, like, when to poke and when to sit back. You know, like, when to challenge and when to just sit back is kind of, finding that balance, I find. And for me, I think it's second guessing myself all the time. It's definitely always, you know, kind of looking back and going, did I do that right? Did I, you know what I mean? Oh, maybe I should have said this, or, you know, so it's just that kind of second guessing. And I think because of my own experiences, you know, you can look at what was helpful for you, right? And kind of, it's been a long journey, but looking at what's been helpful for me and understanding that that's not going to be helpful for everybody.
Yes,
right?
That's so true.
So just because it, you know, like, I hate CBT. Like, I would take CBT and throw it down a drain, and, like, seriously, like, but it was because of my own frustration with it, right? It just never worked, and people were always cramming it down my throat, and I always felt so angry because I felt misunderstood all the time, right? And so understanding that, yeah, you know, CBT has its strengths. It wasn't good for me, but it might be good for somebody else, you know, and understanding that, or incorporating it and stuff like that. So trying to figure out those limitations about how my own experience kind of clouds my judgment.
That's true. Not everything lands.
Yeah. Depending on the person, it lands differently too.
So when you see yourself in these artworks, because these are your self-reflections, what do you think of her?
Me?
Yeah. What's your experience of your reflection?
That I've got a lot of learning to do. I guess maybe I think having more trust in myself, like learning to have more trust in my own thoughts and my own abilities, and trust that I have something to offer that might be useful.
I see.
Because I think I don't trust myself as much as I probably should.
That's interesting. What is it that you think is getting in the way of being able to trust yourself?
I think it's still like it's the DID, like knowing that it's there, and knowing that it's because I don't perceive the world the same way. I mean, nobody perceives the world the same way, but I interact with the world in a very different way, and I have a very different experience. I don't know what it's like to think in a mind that is unified, right? And so sometimes I question my ability to understand what other people are going through because I have these natural checkoffs, right? Like like when I'm sitting down doing a paper, I might not be very present for that, right? And I can go and hand it in and get a 95, right? Very easily. For me, I can sit down and write a 25-page paper in a couple hours and just be done, right? But that's not the experience for most people, right? And there's a lot of stuff that so it has its advantages, but it has its disadvantages too, right? So being able to experience emotion, I don't know what it's like to experience several emotions at the same time. I've never had that experience. So I think it's just trying to understand people where they are at and understand that their experience is very, very different than mine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's a good thing because it keeps whatever it is that's happening in the room at a distance, right? So that you're not walking out of the room holding on to it.
Yeah. So, so it's just trusting my own work, the things that I've done, that I'm capable, that I'm gonna screw up sometimes, but it's okay. We all kind of do that.
So did you find the process of actually creating helpful in regards to self-reflection?
Yeah, it was good. I enjoy doing art. I do it with my kids all the time and stuff like that. So, and the nice thing is when you're doing art is you can be very reflective while you're doing it, right? So, whereas writing, I find I'm not nearly as reflective because I think another part takes over. So I'm not nearly as kind of, I don't know, it just becomes very formulaic.
Oh, I see.
I think. So,
Right. Maybe surface?
Very surface. Very logical.
Right.
There's no emotion. Yeah.
Do you find a difference between just writing, reflecting on whatever it is happening, and writing, reflecting on your art?
Yeah, sometimes. Depends on if I have time to sit and really kind of like listen to what all the other parts of me are saying. So like this one as an example, right? Because I was only partly present for this one. So I was listening to them when you were asking about this, and then listening to figure out, okay, yeah, that is what that is. Like,
yes,
so,
yes, okay.
No, okay, that's what that is.
Interesting.
So it's just if I have the time to really sit and kind of like pay attention, right, to what's going on,
right?
then it's okay. But yeah, I have to just be really careful I don't get into that mode of just kind of like writing logically from the logical part of my brain, because then there's nothing really there.
Well, and it's also too interesting that this one is the least structured of all of them, the least precise.
Yep.
More flow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I know a part of me, Alana, that did that. She's really, really creative.
Yes.
Yeah. She's less rigid.
Very good. Excellent.